have Najat as the next speaker on this topic. She was a speaker last year, she was fabulous, but the area that she operates in is really probably one of the most hot topics, one of the more hot topics in the industry, which is really what are the developments in artificial intelligence. A very controversial, interesting area. I won't read her bio. I think you see it in the invitation and also in your binder, but she's had a fantastic career and in this space. And the latest development is she has been named the next CEO of her company, Recursion, effective January 1. So we want to congratulate her and her new journey, right? So let me just start out. This is just going to be a fireside chat. So AI is one of those interesting topics, and it's interesting because there's so many different opinions about how good it is, whether it'll be successful. Will its successes or failures depend very heavily on the application and so forth. I personally think that there'll be some big successes and some massive failures in this space because AI, first of all, is very good at certain things, but it's not good at everything. And the other is all the people putting in massive amounts, such as, Microsoft or OpenAI, so forth, and data centers, it's not clear, they can't even explain necessarily what their return on that investment is going to be. But if you're spending 190 billion a year on models and data centers, that's maybe even a low number. The question is, how do you get your money back? But I think that the two things that are clear to me, one is I'm 100% confident that the cost of electricity, your electric bill is going to go up. That's the one thing I'm absolutely sure of. But the other is that the people supplying, enabling that sector, such as NVIDIA and so forth, are going to be winners for quite a while. Everyone else, it's not so clear, except that there's certain applications of AI that clearly are very intelligent and likely very successful applications. So let's start out. What I'd like to do is, we have about 30 minutes, I'd like to divide it into two parts. One is a big picture, the big picture, what Najat sees as a big picture commentary on AI. And then we'll really talk about the application in the pharmaceutical space, but in particular also what her company is doing, which is very heavily involved with AI. So Najat, maybe if you can just say big picture, if someone just asked you, well, tell me, what do you think of AI overall? What would you say?
I'm going to answer that question in the healthcare space, or at least in the life sciences space, which is the space that I operate in. What do I think of it? Taking a step back, we all know the stats, right? Like the failure rate is high, 90%, costs are high. And I think AI is making a difference in many different industries. And I always get asked the question, why hasn't it happened yet already in life sciences? And I like to use the analogy of, if ultimately what we want to do is have a car that you can give to someone, and that's a drug, let's just say that's the analogy. The problem with life sciences is a lot of the road and the infrastructure hasn't been built. So, let's be really honest here. The reason why OpenAI and some of these other companies can do what they're doing is the corpus of data that's needed to train these models and to use them exists. Now, they're not the perfect data. They're biased in many different ways, and that's why you see the answers can also be biased, which is not appropriate, but that corpus of data existed. When you look at the life sciences space, where is there one real development that's happened using AI? Sequence to protein structure prediction, AlphaFold 2, 3, BOLS, there's so many of these models, which, beat some of the competitions that people were working on for 50 years. But why did that happen? Yes, it's good models in AI, I'm not trying to take anything from it, but because there was a really well curated data set called the protein database, a data set that existed, somebody curated that over 15 years. But other than that, there aren't a lot of beautiful public data sets that exist. So then you have two options. Either you train on messy data and you have results that are going to be big failures, and I agree with you, Peter, or you actually generate the data. And there are companies that are trying to do that. Recursion is one of them, but there are many companies, 2Point and others, and it takes time and cost to actually build data sets the right way. On the other hand, you'll see pharma companies are now starting to, I would say over the last 5 years, analyze the data sets that they have. Now, having been in a large pharma like J&J, only a fraction of that is actually useful for building AI models. The reason is, if you did a mouse model, an in vivo PKP study in like 1983, and then you did another one in 1990, 1995, they're not measured in a way that's repeatable. It's not as useful for AI models. You need to have enough of a center of gravity, the critical mass, to then build a model. So that's the truth of where the state of AI is. And, however, having said all of that, do I think it can make a difference? I think you're already starting to see it, right? Like, look at the clinical development space. That's where I did a lot of the AI work when I was at J&J. Instead of asking a CRO where do the patients exist, you can do something very simple. You can use the claims data like that exist, that have been integrated, like the companies that have integrated 300 million of the 330 million patient lives in the US. You can build simple AI models that say, if I'm looking for ovarian cancer, second line plus, platinum resistant, these are the prior treatments. You can find in a heat map where these patients are. You just don't know who they are, but you know the PIs or the hospitals, and you can just go recruit. People are starting to do that. I was doing that at J&J, we're doing that now. It's much better. It's like having Google Maps to go to a direction A to B versus stopping at every gas light and saying, hey, do you think I should go left or right? That's like the easy stuff. And then there's a lot of stuff around protocol generation and easy stuff that people are starting to do. The harder stuff is things that we consider more scientific insight or medical insight. So patient selection. Which patient cohort do I think is going to respond better? Or novel target. And I think what happened 5 years ago when a lot of these tech bio companies started, or even 10 years ago, was, hey, we have an interesting insight. Let's put it in the clinic. I think humility around knowing what it takes to make a drug, and I don't know how to say this, but not oversimplifying biology, which is incredibly complex. You're starting to see the two worlds starting to collide. That's really important, because then what you end up seeing now is, yes, there's no, like, I'll give you an example, like we just had a milestone of 30 million from Roche Genentech. What Recursion did was build a map of biology. So like the Google Maps I was talking about, we made about 100 billion microglia cells, 100 billion in our labs. So it's not just, dry lab stuff. And then you knock out every gene in the human genome, and you can also overexpress genes. And what you end up getting is correlations, gene-gene correlations, pathway signatures. Then you can add compounds on top of that, and you get gene compound signatures. That's the initial kernel of like what could be a novel target and a novel drug. Why am I saying this? This didn't happen 5 years ago. No pharma company generated data like that 5 years ago. But there are pharma companies like Roche and Lilly and others that are getting into this space. Lilly just did the partnership with NVIDIA on a supercomputer. I remember when Recursion did that 3 years ago, people asked, why would you need that? Why do you need so much supercomputer? And now you see others just trying to do it. So where I think AI has a huge role to play in drug discovery and development, but it's not AI alone. It's using AI in areas that can make a difference to make a drug. And that's where you start to see tech bio companies that started very much on, here's a cool model, here's a cool data set. Now they're starting to talk about, here's a program that is data that's starting to look really interesting, that's differentiated, and this is how we use AI to get there. That's where the industry needs to go. That's how you reduce the hype and increase the focus on substance. And I think there's a lot more work to be done, but I think that's the evolution. And on the pharma side, you also see pharma trying to put more investment in AI, in infrastructure. So the two worlds are starting to collide, and I think it's for the betterment. Is there any slam dunk example yet? No. But I think you do have data, like we should have some data next month, hopefully, If it holds, where we have a program in FAP that's shown higher polyp burden reduction than any other company or any asset investigated so far. So we're just trying to see these green shoots, but we still have some ways to go.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. In fact, I do think if you sort through industries and say which ones have the greatest potential benefit from AI, I think pharma and healthcare is one of them. Although the key is what you said before, which is at this stage, and I'm very important, it's best at taking relatively pristine data and analyzing it and seeing correlations, right? It's really bad when you got dirty data because then it can only make, analyze based on the data. So the vast majority of AI applications will not work. But I think that pharma industry is ideal. Not every application, because the pharma industry has more sets of data than most industries that are pristine, that they can control. By the way, the other applications, there's things like radiology, or like, that's a classic example where you have lots of data and it's correlation, seeing pattern recognition. So I would not recommend young people going into radiology, because that's the one profession probably one. And the other is pure cost reduction, like, customer service for looking up products and so forth. But then a lot of them, applications are just not gonna work because it's just not precise enough relative to the quality of the data. But
Yeah.
pharma, I think so, and you're in an area where it really can work, right?
Well, what I was just gonna say is it's also, so there's two ends of it, right? One is, yes, this is why it takes time because you have to create the right data sets, et cetera, what I just mentioned. I mean, there's also other signals, right? Like companies, a lot of these companies, including ours, and I'm a chemist by background, and I also have a background in computer science, so I'm very careful when you actually make a molecule. We're synthesizing an average of 200, 250. We don't make 2, 3, 4, 5,000. Why? Because you can actually predict it so much more in silico, and then you only synthesize the compounds that you have more conviction in. That is changing. That's changing a lot, and that is to your cost and time piece. It takes us half the time to get to IND, and it's not just us, others are trying to do that too. So I think what I would say is, sometimes people hear this and they're like, oh, it's so complex. It's gonna take another 10 years, I don't have to worry about it. That would be a big mistake. Because if you look at, people say overnight, oh my gosh, ChatGPT happened and everything changed. But for those of us also in the tech world that have been watching the models, the data and so forth, we saw that coming 2 years ago. It's just by the time it hits this inflection point, it's really hard to catch up. So investment in compute, in generating data that's gonna be useful, not just any data, and always start with the question that matters. So if I'm trying to recruit a patient, and I'm trying to figure out, are there 3 patients in Drexel and 2 in Penn for the kind of disease I'm looking, I don't need perfect data. I just need directionally good enough. Because what do we get today? We get a call from a CRO saying, we're telling you there are 30 patients, and guess what? Usually, it's never positively correlated. Versus, if you look at novel biology, even if you get these insights from these multimodal data sets, we still do the wet lab validation. We're still doing the right assays to say, can you triangulate that data and if this is useful? So it's almost augmenting how you do discovery and augmenting the level of evidence before you go into making molecules. So that's the only thing I would say is it takes time until it seems so obvious. So you have to catch the wave at the right time. You can't be too early or too late. And last thing I'll say, the investment in this space, not just from investors, but pharma, this is not a reverse. This is not going backwards. This is here to stay. So it's how do you get involved and how do you get ahead of it?
One of the things, one question I have is, could you sort of help us understand what your relationship is with the AI company? Like, who do you work with, and what's the nature of the relationship with them? Because as you think about, if we think about your application Recursion, there's some things that clearly you're doing the work yourself, but clearly you're not building the AI models yourself, or maybe you are.
Yeah.
So maybe you can explain, what is your relationship with these companies that everybody talks about? or is it something that you're generating yourself?
Yeah, for instance, we have about 65 petabytes of data. About 40 petabytes of that is internally generated in our labs. We have, automated labs in Salt Lake City and also in Oxford, robots and everything. Like, we have a portfolio of about 6 programs, preclinical, clinical, about 15, 20 more in discovery. We have 7, 8 programs we're partnering on with Sanofi. We have multiple we're starting with Roche and also by, so like if you think about the volume and we have 600 people, it's hard to do without robots and automation and prediction. You can't do everything by hand. So just to give one example. But I've always said, and I carried this from my J&J days, the best ideas don't have to sit in the 4 walls of J&J. And I say the same thing about Recursion. So 40 petabytes of the 65 is our data. The other 25 or so petabytes, we partnered with companies like Helix, Tempus, in terms of clinical genomic data sets that are really important for us to connect the biological insights to the patient, close the loop. So that's one. We also partner with companies like Health Verity and others on claims data, EHR data. I don't want to be curating that data myself. There are companies that's their business, so we partner with them. It's like being able to select the right partners from various parts of the ecosystem. We have a partnership with NVIDIA on our supercomputer, and we built the supercomputer in Salt Lake City with NVIDIA, and they're also an investor for us. So, and then we also have our partners like Roche and Sanofi, where we're doing a lot of the work in collaboration with them, wet and dry lab. On the models piece that you mentioned, Peter, we actually have teams that build our AI models. Now, sometimes we will take open source models, take our data, make them better for what we need. Sometimes our models we build straight from scratch because no one's built it. And sometimes we partner with, just like we did with MIT and NVIDIA on Bones 2, which has now been used by over 100,000 people who made it open source. So it's again, I always say to win this war on making better drugs, I will take every good idea from anybody who's there to win it. We're pretty agnostic to inside or outside, but I do think in order to have a company that really knows what is high quality AI, you need to have your own high quality data. That is a moat, competitive moat. You need to have really good people, not just really good AI and machine learning people from the tech industry. You need people who know AI and machine learning, but who also understand biology and chemistry enough, right? Who appreciate the complexity, who don't over-interpret like some answer. That's really hard to find. So kind of that's how we partner with the ecosystem.
So it sounds like pretty much you don't really depend on third parties as a critical component of success.
No.
Because you talk about open source, because that's interesting, because a lot of people said, well, okay, there are the open AIs and so forth, but there's enough out there that's open source that you can work with as long as you have people who can work with it. But it sounds like you're not held hostage by OpenAI or Anthropic or whatever.
Yeah, and just to be clear, OpenAI and Anthropic, I mean, they are, they started with LLMs, general language, general knowledge. Now more in the scientific, it can summarize papers well, etc. That's fantastic. We have different versions of that and we can customize it. But what we are doing is generating novel biology that's not been published in a paper ever. So this is a different world, right? We have our own labs to do that. We're generating these, like I said, 100 billion cells, 1 trillion iPSC-derived neuronal cells. No one's made that in the world. And then we do all of our perturbations. So that's like novel biology, novel chemistry. So we don't compete with OpenAI or others on it. Now, I am more than happy, and I use ChatGPT a lot for everything personal and professional. We have our own instance of that in the company, and we can use it for multiple reasons. So this is how we use everything in the world that's good for us, but we also have our own competitive moment.
It's very interesting because, an analogy, young partners, we're always trying to do things ahead of other people. And we decided we'd look at the issue of to what extent could we use AI to create a revenue stream and so forth. And we came to the same conclusion you did. We looked at it and we said, look, first of all, the good news is young partners has a lot of our own proprietary data. And what you see in this is only a fraction, the presentations I gave, it's just a fraction of what we know. But we take that data analyses and we use that to solve client problems in a way that other people can't. But we looked at AI and we said, wow, where it's most useful will be is if we applied our data, but then if we did that, we exposed our data analyses to third parties. So we don't want to do it. So in terms of applications like automated, if you're a brokerage business, right, and you sell insurance and stocks and so forth, I get it that you could probably help automate that. But when it comes to our kind of business, which is advisory and so forth, we came to the conclusion, we're best off if we generate our own data and then we use our AI models to get to answers internally and then sell those answers to the outside world, which is essentially the same thing, right? So do you think your situation is very special, or is it a general philosophy that companies in life sciences should apply?
I always start from first principles, which is to make a drug, what do you need to do? Good biology, understand chemistry, predict tox, all that good stuff, know which patients to go into the clinic and execute flawlessly. To do that, I think it's important to have an end-to-end tech stack. Not being vertically integrated is very hard, because even if you have a very nice novel target, if you don't know how to do development, you're in trouble. So that's step number one, I think end-to-end, vertically integrated. Number two, I think having a fast loop of learning, this is where the tech part comes in, is very important. Think about large companies or biotechs. We have institutional knowledge, then somebody leaves, and it's kind of gone, especially the failures, we don't publish it. So there's a lot of stop and start, stop and start, stop and start. Now, when you do things in an automated way, you don't have that stop and start. You're collecting every single piece of data. That's fantastic, because then you can reuse it over and over and over again. ChatGPT and other things, you use the world's knowledge. Imagine if it wasn't captured in a way that we could query it over and over again. So I think that's really important, having a wet and dry lab. And the thing is, look, even we use agentic agents. We're trying to use them now in terms of generating a hypothesis, reviewing the data, proposing recommendations. Do they always get it right? No. But how do you make it better? It's just like educating an associate. You give them feedback from somebody who's super knowledgeable and like a very narrow set of associates to get smart really fast. And then it allows the person to think about the third, fourth order problems. So do I think we are rare, to back to your question? No, look, even in other industries that use a lot of AI, have the people disappeared? No. You still need the orchestrators and the architects who can pull it all together to figure out how do you integrate all of this information and make good business decisions. That's a talent that's not gone away. It's just changed in terms of how you get your data, when you get your data. But I was just having a conversation with my team today, and they're building an automated target product profile. I said, I don't want to wait until ESMO and my commercial person tells me that this person, can you just automate the TPP? Can you do it like that from discovery? So it's not the commercial person saying that patient population is too small, or somebody else. I want unbiased. And I wanted to flag it for me whenever my delta has decreased below a certain threshold, because there's been some other data in some other company. Why can't we just do that? Does that mean my job goes away? Maybe, I don't think so. But what happens is it makes my job easier. It makes me more efficient in my decision making. So I don't think that's going to change. It's just we have to view ourselves and our time differently and sort of the tools that we use.
That's great. Let's open it up to questions. Anyone in person here like to ask a question?